Welcome to the first big section of the course. So in this section, we will learn the fundamental language of web development, which is HTML. And we're going to learn HTML by building a very small example project, where you will learn all about the most important HTML elements. So for things like creating headings, paragraphs, lists, images, links, and more. Okay, so let's go start this journey right now. Welcome back. Let's now very quickly learn what HTML actually is and what we can do with it. So basically, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And remember how we learned earlier that HTML is one of the core web technologies along with CSS and JavaScript, right? Now, HTML is a markup language that we web developers can use to structure and describe the entire content of any web page. So notice how I said markup language, because HTML is really not a programming language. It's a markup language because we use it to describe something. And in the case of HTML, we do describe content using elements. So we have different elements that we can use to describe different types of content. So for example, we have the P element that we already used in the lecture where we created our very first web page. And so we used the P element there to create a paragraph. But we really have all kinds of different elements. So elements to create links, to create page headings, images, video, and a lot more, as you will learn throughout this section and basically throughout the entire course. Then, as we also learned in that lecture where we built our very first web page, web browsers such as Google Chrome do essentially understand HTML code and can render it as a final website. So a website that we can see in the browser. Okay, so this is essentially what HTML is and what we can do with it. But now let's just zoom in a little bit and take a look at the anatomy of an HTML element. So basically, take a look at the building blocks of each HTML element. And again, we are looking at the paragraph element here, as you can see by the P. And so all of this here is actually the element itself. Now, an HTML element is usually made up of three parts. First is the opening tag, which is the name of the element. So in this case, it's the P, wrapped in the less than and the greater than symbols. Probably they have some other names, but that's how I like to call these symbols. So it's less than, P, and then greater than. Then after that, we have basically the content of the element. So in this example, that is just text, but there might be other types of content. For example, an element can contain in itself another element, which we then call a child element. Also, some elements, such as images, have actually no content at all and have only an opening tag. And all of this will, of course, become very intuitive as we start writing HTML. This is just so that you know what I'm talking about when I speak of opening tag or closing tag or content. And speaking of the closing tag, it is basically the same as the opening tag, but with a slash. So we open this paragraph element simply with the P, and we then close it with /P. Okay? Now for elements that do not have content, such as the image element that I mentioned before, we actually omit the closing tag. So in that case, we only have the opening tag, and that's it. And we will see that in action, of course, once we start integrating images into a web page. Okay, and that's really all you need in order to start learning HTML in practice, which is exactly what we will do in the next lecture. Welcome back. So the first thing that we need to learn about HTML is the common HTML document structure. So a structure that each and every HTML document needs to have. But let's start by taking a very quick look at the project that we're going to build throughout this section. So we are building the code magazine. So as you can see here, and in this code magazine, we are building this very simple kind of blog post called the basic language of the web. So we have some links here, we have images, we have some bold text, we have, here you see we have some italic text, we have lists, and yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that we will learn in this section, so that by the end you will have learned the fundamentals of HTML and will end up with this project. Okay, but anyway, let's now finally get to work. And the first thing that we need to do again is to create our project folder. So let's go back to our desktop or to where you are working with your files. And what I'm going to do is to open up this folder that we just downloaded in the last section. So basically the starter code. And then I'm going to reach into this starter folder and grab a copy of the starter files here. So I will copy this folder and put it on my desktop right here. Now, instead of doing that, you could also simply go ahead and use this folder here as your project folder, but that might lead to some confusions. So I always prefer to simply copy this folder here to somewhere else. Okay, let's go back to VS Code. Can actually close this. And then let's come here to the menu and then File and open a new window. All right. And then right here, we can select Open Folder, or we can also expand the sidebar here and click on Open Folder right here. So remember that this will define our project folder. So I'm going to my desktop and then select this folder that I just created there. So open, and there we go. So we can close this one now and push this one to the left side. This panel we don't need. And then here inside of our project folder, we can, just like before, create a new file. And we will once again call it index.html. So it's just a regular file with the HTML file extension and the name of index, which should always be the main page of any website. All right. So as I mentioned before, we have some images here as our starter files and also this text file here. So let's actually also open up this file. And now I will click this icon here to collapse this sidebar to give us some more space. Okay. Now remember how in the first section we used this kind of cheat to create our HTML structure. So we wrote the exclamation mark and then tab, and that then gave us all of this structure. However, to properly learn HTML, we of course need to know how to write all of this structure on our own. And so that should always be the first thing that we learn in HTML. So we start with an empty page, and then the first thing that we need to do is to declare a so-called doc type. So just write the less than symbol, exclamation mark, and then doc type. And you see that VS Code is actually trying to autocomplete this here for us, but let's just write it all by hand so that this code basically sticks in your memory. Okay? So we have to write exclamation mark doc type HTML in order to basically tell the browser that this document uses HTML. Next up, we need to create an HTML element. So remember from the last lecture that to create an element, again, we use the less than symbol, then the name of the element, which in this case is HTML, and then we close that. And once again, VS Code automatically now closes that element for us. So it created this closing tag. Now, in case you don't want that, you can actually turn off that functionality. And let me show you how. So again, you come here to the settings, and then the name of this setting is called auto close tags. And actually, I will turn this off for now so that you can really write this code by hand instead of having VS Code helping you. So we will turn this back on a bit later, but for now, I really want you to learn how to write these elements by hand without any help. Okay, So we have the opening and the closing tag of the HTML element. And now as for the content, we will actually put another element inside it. So let's give ourselves some space here. And then inside of the HTML, we want first a head element. So let's write it, opening, and I will then immediately close it actually, because for now we will not put any content in there. Okay, so the head and then the body. And I will explain in a second what each of these actually is. So each and every HTML document always needs to start with the HTML element like this. Then inside of this element, as we just put, we need one head element and one body element. Now, the head element is basically for things that are not visible in the browser window. So this head will contain the page title, some additional information about the page, a link to CSS files, or other things. And as we go through the course, we will fill this head with all kinds of different elements. But for now, all I want to do is to just specify the title. So let's use the title element for that. And this page I want to call the basic language of the web, HTML. So basically that's the title here of this blog post as well. Okay, and then we need the closing tag of this element. Okay. Then the body is actually for all the elements that will be visible on the page. So all the elements that we see here in the browser will always be inside of the body element. And just to show it to you, instead of leaving it empty, let me put some code here. So I will again use the heading 1 element, so h1, that we used in the very first coding lecture. And let me just grab this text from here. So that's the content, and then again, closing it. All right. Now we haven't saved this file yet, but as we do, Prettier will again format this file for us. So let's give it a save. And you see that now we have the correct indentation. And by indentation, what I mean is that since this head element, for example, is inside the HTML, it should have some space here to make that visually obvious. Okay, so basically this is just a tab here. So if I hit the tab key, then it will add another level of indentation. And so now it's at the same level as the title, which doesn't make sense because the title is also inside of the head, right? So we have the head inside of HTML, and then inside of the head, we have the title element. And so therefore, it has another level of indentation, okay? Now, this is just for aesthetic reasons to make our code more readable. So the browser really doesn't care about this indentation, but it is still important for us to be able to read the code. So again, let's give it a save. And I think we are ready now to actually go ahead and open this in the browser. So let's come to our project folder and then double-click index.html. And nice, here it is. Let's put it here first, close up this one, but I will also leave this demo open just so we see what we want to achieve in the end. Okay, let's close up this one here. And with this, we learned the basic structure of HTML. So let's just quickly review. So every HTML document always needs to start with the so-called doc type. And so this will let the browser know that we are actually using HTML in this file. And all browsers will then know that they should use the HTML5 specification to render this HTML. Then we have the HTML element, which is always the parent element of both the head and of the body element. So this structure is really always the same in all web pages. We always need to have an HTML element with a head and with a body. Now, what we put into the head and the body is optional, but having these two is not optional. So we always need head and body. Now, in this situation, all we put in the head is just the title element, but here we can put all kinds of other stuff that are not visible or that are not rendered here in this main part of the browser. On the other hand, the content that we actually want to be rendered here should go into the body. And so that's why having this h1 element here that then appears visible on the page. Okay, and that's it. That's the basic HTML structure for each and every HTML document that you really need to know. And with that, let's move on to the next lecture, where we will learn a couple of new elements for working with text. So I hope to see you there soon. In this lecture, we will continue learning how to mark up text. So we will keep using some headings, some paragraphs, and we will also learn how to make text bold and italic. And let's actually start with headings. So usually the goal of headings is to break up big blocks of text into more logical sections and to basically add a title to each of these sections. Now, you already learned about the h1 heading, but there are actually 6 different headings. So there's a hierarchy of headings so that we can establish a hierarchy in our text. So we can go all the way from h1 to h6. So let's grab this text here and create all of these 6 different headings, just so you can see how they look different visually in the browser. So the h1 we can call the primary heading, and then the secondary heading is the h2. And I'm pasting the exact same text here so we can see the visual difference between them. So we have h1, h2, and then for the tertiary heading, we use h3. Pasting the same text there. And now we just have to repeat all of this all the way down to h6. All right, and as you're typing these characters, so this code, all of this will start getting into your brain, and you will start getting practice writing HTML. So h6, and then let's give it a save, and then reloading the browser. And so you can see very nicely that this really created a visual hierarchy, basically, between these 6 headings. So the first one is the biggest one by far, and then this last one, which is the h6, is kind of small. And then in between, we have all these different variations. Okay, so now we know how these different headings work, but now let's take a look at our demo page, actually, just to see which kind of headings we actually need. So we have basically the name of this blog, so the code magazine, and this is the biggest heading. Then below that, we have the name of the article, so of this blog post, and this one is a little bit smaller. So it's not a primary heading anymore, but it is a secondary heading. Then inside of this text here, and remembered how I said that a heading is basically to break up text into logical sections, right? And so here in between this text, we have another section. And so here inside this, let's say, blog post, we have another heading. And so this should probably be an h3. All right. And so let's now create a markup for this kind of structure. So we have all this text that we need actually here. So we just need to copy paste this code here, or this text. All right. So I'm leaving these here for now for reference. And so remember, we are going to start with the primary heading. So I'll just paste this here and then close the h1. Okay. Then let's create our secondary heading. And again, I will grab the text from here. And so that's actually the one that we already had before. So this one is exactly the same as this one. But that doesn't really matter. It's no problem. And then let's get our h3, which is what is HTML. Let's just write that. And then let's check out what this looks like. And here we go. Nice. So this is kind of the structure of our text right now. And now we just need to fill it up with the paragraphs in between. So basically for each of these paragraphs that we have in the text, we can simply create a paragraph in the code, right? And we already used the paragraph element before. And so that's kind of a generic element that we use to mark up bigger blocks of text. So remember, that's the P element. And let me just grab the content here. So the first one that we have here is posted by Laura Jones on Monday, June 21st. Let me copy it. Oh, and you see that now this element was again closed automatically. Let's give it a save here. And now let's create some additional paragraphs here. So the P element, and let me actually close it immediately here. And then let's grab our text. So it's this one here. So copy and paste. And so by now we are starting to build really our project at the same time as learning about these elements. So this one here as well. So I'm copying it again and then pasting it inside of the P element. So let's give it a save and reload it again. And that's looking nice already. Great. Let's take a look. And now let's just grab two more. So these two paragraphs here. So after the H3 that we have down here. So P and closing it immediately as well. So just double clicking to selecting all of it, which is a nice technique. And then let's just add the final one. And you see that in the meantime, it formatted the code here, and that's because of the auto save and the auto format. Okay, now I saved it manually actually. Let's go here, and there is our content again. Now to clean this up a little bit, let's now actually get rid of all of these 6 headings here. So now you already know how they work and that they exist. And actually, instead of getting rid of them, we can use something called comments in HTML. So a comment in HTML is a way of writing some code that will not be visible in the browser. And this is very useful because it allows us to write comments about our code, or also to simply hide some code that we do not want to be rendered on the browser. Now to write a comment, it's a little bit of a weird syntax. So again, we write the less than symbol, then an exclamation mark, then dash, dash, and then to close the comment, VS Code already automatically created this dash dash closing part. So this opens a new comment and this closes that same comment. Now let's remove this part here, and now you see that everything turned gray. So all of this is a comment now, but we actually want the comment to end right here. So dash dash and close. And now only this part here is gray, which means that this is now the comment and it will now not be rendered. So let's check that out. And if I reload, now it is gone from the page. Nice. But we can still keep it here in the code, just so you know that H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 also exist. Now, just one thing that I didn't mention earlier about the headings is that each and every page should only have one H1 heading. So only one primary heading. That is very important to keep in mind. This is not really mandatory, so it doesn't violate any HTML rules if we have multiple H1s, but it is a very good practice to always just have one of them. Now about all the other ones, we can have, of course, multiple of them. So for example, I think on our page we actually have another of these headings here in the middle of our text. And so in our case, these are H3 headings. So you see, here is another one. And so of course, we can also add that here right away. Why not? So H3, why should you learn HTML? And then, of course, closing it. Okay. Now, just to finish, let me also quickly show you how we can create bold and italic text. So here in our demo site, we have this name of the author, which is Laura Jones in bold. So how can we do that in HTML? Well, there is a special element for that, or actually two elements. And let me start with the simpler one, which is simply called B. So B stands for bold, and so the part that we want to be bold, so Laura Jones in this case, all we have to do is to put it inside of a B element. So we can just write B like this in the beginning, and then at the end of the content, we simply add our closing tag. So that's /B, close it. And now, once we reload our own page, so take a look here at Laura Jones. If we reload that, then you see that it turned bold. Great. Now, however, the use of B is actually not a good practice. So B is actually an older HTML element, and starting in HTML5, we should always use the strong element instead of B. The reason for that is that B doesn't have any so-called semantic meaning, and more about that a little bit later in this section. But essentially what this means is that B is simply an element, but without a specific meaning, while on the other hand, the strong element means that this is really an important element that we want to stand out from the page. So if we say strong on the opening tag, and then of course also in the closing tag, then it will look exactly the same in the browser. So let's confirm. Yeah, it's still bold, but now it has a meaning that it is a more important text. And that is essentially the idea of semantic HTML. And again, we will talk more about semantic HTML by the end of this section. So for now, just know that don't use B, but use strong to make text bold. Now let's also make some text italic here, and let's choose this word here. So just fundamental. And just like with B, there are actually two ways of doing it. The older one is the I element. So wrapping whatever part of the text we want to be italic inside of the I element. And so I just stands for italic. And indeed, you see that now it changed. But one more time, in order to make this semantic HTML, we should no longer use the I element, but the EM element, which stands for emphasize. So we want to emphasize this text here, and that is the reason why we make it italic. So that's also the reason why the browser then shows it as italic. Right? So if we reload, it is still italic, but now we basically gave it the meaning of an emphasized text. Okay, great. This is great progress. You're doing really well up until this point. Now, just to finish this lecture, I actually already want to give you your very first small coding challenge. So what I want you to do is basically this. Let me show it to you here. So I want you to make the first letter of these words, so hypertext markup language, I want you to make the H, T, M, and L bold. All right. So basically that is this text right here. So this H, this T, this M, and this L, they should all be bold. So they should be displayed here in bold, just like I have it in the demo page. So do you think that you can do that and write some HTML code on your own for the very first time? Well, I really hope that you try it because, as I said before, these coding challenges are really, really important for you to start practicing your skills, even if it's just something really simple like this. So please go ahead and pause the video right now and make each of these 4 letters bold. And I will be back here in a second with you to show you how it's done. So, did you manage to do this? Well, this is how it works. So once again, we just need to wrap the part that we want to be marked as bold into a strong element. And in this case, that is just the H. And so that's why we're closing this strong element right here in the middle of the word. Then here we want the T, and so again, we write. And so again, a strong element here. So the opening tag, and then the other one right here. And of course, then the same for the other two letters. Okay, so hopefully I didn't do any mistake there. Let's reload, and there you go. HTML is now marked in bold. Great. So again, I hope that you managed to do this on your own, as this is really important for your learning process. Let's keep working with text, and in this lecture, we will learn how to create lists with bullet points and also with numbers. And what I mean by list is basically like a list of bullet points like we have here, and also like an ordered list with numbers like here with 1, 2, 3 ordered elements. All right, so that is very easy to do in HTML. So let's see how. So starting with the numbered list, so this one here, it is here at the end of this section of our text. So in the what is HTML part, so we have this paragraph, then we have this paragraph, and then we actually have another paragraph there that we missed, and then after that we have the list. So let's get all of this content. So these are the 3 list items, and that is the missing paragraph. Okay, just paste all of that here. And now I will simply wrap this element inside of a P. And so there we have the paragraph. So we have everything nicely structured here. And now let's start the list. So the element to start a ordered list, which is what a list with numbers is called, we use the OL element. So like this. And so OL stands for ordered list. And we opened it, so of course we also need to close the element. Okay, now let's give us some space here, because actually for each of the elements of the list, we need to create an element inside of the ordered list. And so for that, we use the LI element, which stands for list item. So list item, open it and close it. And then let's grab this content. So the opening tag, let's cut it actually. Okay, then I'm going to cut these two as well and paste them down here. And then simply wrap it inside some more LI elements. So again, LI stands for list item, while OL stands for ordered list. Here I'm giving it some indentation using the tab key, just so that they are visually all aligned as child elements of the ordered list. So maybe you noticed how I'm using the terms child elements and parent elements. So whenever we have an element inside of another, basically the container of another element is the parent. So in this case, that's the ordered list. And then the elements that are inside the parent are the child elements. All right, but let's go back here and reload it. And indeed, there is our ordered list. Nice. So the Google Chrome browser understands our code and knows that it should render it as a list of ordered numbers. So 1, 2, 3. And of course, it then automatically applies these numbers without us having to do anything. And if we added another element, let's say we would even add it here at the beginning, that would then become the first element. Oh, sorry. So that would then, as I was saying, become the first element. And indeed, now we have 4 of them, and this one is the first. But this one we don't want. Let's get rid of it. Nice. So that is one of the lists. And then the other one is this one here in the why should you learn HTML part. And again, there is some other content here. So let's go ahead and grab all of this. So from this content file here. So this is the heading, and now we need all of this. Copy and paste. And so once again, I will start by wrapping these into paragraphs. And so maybe you are starting to see that we are really creating a nice and tidy structure where each piece of content is inside of some element. So we don't have like any text floating around just inside of the body without being in an element, right? We always are creating a nice structure where each element has a certain meaning. So for example, all of these are, of course, paragraphs, and that's why we use the P element. And this piece of content here is a list, and that's why we use the ordered list element. And so that is essentially to assign some meaning to the content and to structure it in a logical way. And so this then allows web browsers to display it in a way that makes sense. But anyway, now we have this content here, which we want in this kind of list, like bullet points here. And so the element that we use for that is UL. And UL, maybe you can guess, stands for unordered list. All right, let's close it down here. UL. And so an ordered list with the numbers is OL, and the one without numbers, which we say is unordered, because the order of the elements does not matter. So that is then called UL, which stands for unordered list. But then inside of the list itself, we still have to use the LI element for the individual items. So just like before, we need to wrap all of these different pieces of content into an LI element. So we already did that before, so I'm sure you know how to do it. And maybe you saw it coming that this is another very small coding challenge for you. So pause the video now and do exactly the same thing that we did up here. So wrap each of these items in an actual LI element. And so like this, you can keep practicing writing some HTML on your own. Okay, so I hope that was a simple challenge. And so let's quickly do it here. All right. So this one here actually has multiple lines, so it ends here. And you see that the formatting here is completely wrong, but I'm not worrying about that, because for that we have the helper tool of Prettier, right? So Prettier takes care of all our formatting. But hopefully you see that without that formatting, this looks like a complete mess, right? It's very hard to understand. So for example, this element here is not a child element of P, so it should be aligned here. And we could do that manually, of course, simply by deleting this space, but we can also just leave it to Prettier once we save the file. Sorry. And here I'm missing the closing slash. And now, as I was saying, as I save the file, then Prettier does its magic and nicely formatted here our elements. Now we also have this empty paragraph here for some reason. So maybe I did some mistake here earlier. So let's just delete it and save it again. And now, as we come here to our page, then indeed, we have our nice unordered list down here. Great. So creating lists is another important part of writing HTML. We use this all the time. And so I hope that you had fun with this lecture, because it was quite an important one. So before you move on, please make sure to review what we just did here, and also think a little bit about some of the things I said earlier, such as the fact that each element has a different meaning, and also that we need to use these elements to structure our content. So we cannot simply just dump all of our text here into the body text and call it a day. So if we did that, there would be no structure and no logic at all. So I just deleted some empty paragraph here, but I just wanted to show you what happens if I select all of this. So copy paste here basically. So if I take it and just paste it down here. So give it a save, and well, you see that it's now all one big blob of text, and HTML doesn't really care about any white space. So any of these line breaks here, they're all irrelevant to HTML. And so if we try to load this, you see that there is no structure at all. So everything is just one huge line of text, and yeah, that's it. There's no structure, there is no meaning, there's nothing, basically. And so I hope that this small example showed you the importance of basically wrapping all pieces of content inside of an element that actually gives that content some meaning. Okay, but with that, I'm leaving you, and I see you soon in the next video. One thing that our blog post is still missing right now is some images. And so let's now learn how to use the HTML image element. So if we check out the demo page, then we notice that here we have two kind of important images. So we have this big image here, which kind of illustrates the blog post. And then we also have this photo here of the author. And so let's now start by incorporating this image here into our blog. So the images are, of course, in our project folder. So they came with the starter files. And the one that we are going to include here is this post image. So you see when you double click, so when you open this file, then VS Code is actually able to display image files without any problems. So we want this image right here after this author. So basically the image serves as a barrier between the beginning of the article and the rest of the page, so the top part. Now, I think that here actually this title here, so this H2 element should be before the author. Let's move that down here. Right, so first, of course, like we have it here, needs to come the actual title, so the heading element, and only then the author, and then this image here. Okay, but anyway, let's now include the image element. So again, right here after this paragraph, we want to include this image. So, just like any other element, we start by writing it like this. But now remember how I actually told you in the first lecture of this section that the image element is a special element. And that's because it doesn't have any content. And therefore, it also doesn't have a closing tag. Instead, what we do is to simply add this slash here at the very end of the element. Now, you might wonder, if we don't specify any content here for this image element, then how will HTML know which element it should display? And that is an excellent question, which brings us to something new in HTML, which are attributes. So attributes are basically pieces of data which we can use to describe elements. So there are lots of different attributes in HTML, and one of them is the source attribute. And so that's the one we are interested in right now. So source goes like this, src, and then an equal, and then we need double quotes like this. And then here we can simply specify the name of the image. So remember that is post image.jpg. And so we just write post image. And we could even allow VS Code to autocomplete that code for us, like by clicking here or going down. And actually that didn't work. But if we just hit enter here, then that would work just fine. So again, we can write it manually or just use VS Code's autocomplete functionality. And that's actually it. That's the very basics that we need in order to display an image. So if we reload this now, you will see that indeed, here it is. Great. So again, let's just quickly recap. We did not specify the image using some content in this element. Instead, what we needed to do was to specify an attribute. And in this case, it's the source attribute. And remember that an attribute is basically like a piece of data, so a piece of information describing this element. So here we are describing the source from which the browser should basically read the image. All right. Now, besides the source attribute, there are other attributes that we can specify for images. And one that we should never skip is the alt attribute. So we write it like this. And alt stands for alternative text. So basically what we need to specify here is some text that should describe what the image is about. And this is very important for various reasons. One of them is that it will allow search engines such as Google Chrome to actually know what is in the image. Because without this description, search engines don't really have a know of knowing what the image is actually about. And second, and probably even more important, is that by specifying the description of the image, we can also allow blind people to use our website. So users who use a screen reader will not see the image, but instead they will have the screen reader read the alternative text, so the description, to them. So never skip this attribute. It's very important to always write a good description. So here let's say that this image here is HTML code on a screen. Okay, now this will not visually change actually what we see here. So let's reload. Unless the image for some reason cannot be found. So let's say that we forgot the G here, for example, and so now this image path is completely wrong. So if we now reload, then the browser will not be able to find the image. But instead, what it will do is to then print our description here. So that's the HTML code on a screen that we gave it here. Okay, so that is actually another use case of the alt text. Let's put it back. And we are actually still not done. So we can specify some more attributes here, which are quite important in this case. So the ones that I mean are the image width and the image height. So right now this image here is a little bit too big. And so let's specify its width to 500 pixels. And don't worry yet about what these 500 pixels mean or exactly what a pixel is. We will talk more about that once we reach the CSS section. But for now, let's just write width and set it to 500. And then let's see. Okay, so now it scaled the image to a width of 500, and it automatically also maintained the aspect ratio of the image. All right, but we can also specify that. So besides the width, we can also specify the height, which should be 200. And I know that because I know the image dimensions. So if we open this up again, you see here that the original image is 1000 by 400. And so if I specify the width as 500, which is just half of 1000, then the height must also be half of 400 here. So that would be 200. Okay, so that should now look the same, and it does. But of course, if I wanted, I could make it a square, for example, which would then completely distort the image just as we see here. Of course, we don't want that. So put it back, and here we go. Great. So this is how we include images into an HTML document. And this one here was only the first one that we wanted. The other image is this author image right here above this author paragraph right here. So the image that we want now is this one, Laura Jones, and we want it with a height and a width of 50 pixels. Okay, so I have another challenge for you. And what I want you to do this time is to include this image that I just showed you on your own right here in this place. Okay, so take a minute and pause the video and include this image with 50 by 50 pixels. And then I'll be back here in a minute with the solution. All right, so hopefully you got some more practice there. So image, and I will immediately start writing the attributes, and I will then in the end close the element. So here we want Laura Jones, and now I will just hit enter or return to autocomplete the file name here. And then the alt text, let's say that this is a head shot of Laura Jones and not Jonas, and a height. And here again, we could now hit enter or return to autocomplete this, but I actually want you to write these attributes by yourself, by hand, so that they get into your head. So that's really important. So a height and a width of 50, and that's it. So let's close the element, give it a save, and then Prettier does this nice job of putting each of these attributes here in one line, which makes it really easy to see. Actually, let's close down our sidebar here. And let's see. And here we go. So here is that picture of Laura Jones now. Okay, well done. Nice progress. So now we know how images work and how attributes work as well. And actually, we can specify attributes also on some other elements in HTML. And one where this is very important is actually the HTML element itself. So here in this HTML element, we should specify the language that we use for this web page, so for this document. And we can do that by saying lang, so specifying the lang attribute. And then in this case, since it is English, we can set it to en. But for other languages, there are other codes. For example, for German, it is probably de, or for Portuguese, it should be pt. And if you have any other language, you can just easily find out the code by Googling. Another thing that we can and actually should do, which needs attributes, is to specify the character set that is used in the document. So that is something that goes into the head because it is a piece of information that describes the document. So here we need another new element. This is simply called meta, which stands for metadata. So metadata means data about the data. And so here we are describing that the character set, which we describe by this attribute. So we say that the character set should be UTF-8, which basically is all the simple characters that we use in the English language. Now this one here is another of these elements that doesn't have a closing tag, and so we just close it like this. Okay? Now I'm not spending a whole lot of time on these elements and on this kind of stuff, because later when you actually build your own pages, then this will all happen automatically. Okay? So this was just to show you that this is just another way or another place in which we need some attributes where we then need to specify a value for it. All right? So UTF-8 here is the value that we specified for this character set attribute. Okay, and yeah, I think that's it for this lecture. So see you in the next one.
All right, we've covered the basics in HTML fundamentals. Now it's time to dive into the exciting stuff. In part 2, we'll explore hyperlinks, learn how to structure our pages effectively, and tackle some challenging exercises. Get ready to level up your web development skills and create awesome websites. Stay tuned for more tips and tricks coming your way.